Welcome into the Corlin Economics Report from San Francisco, California, and the 2006 Hard Assets Investment Conference. Paul Warren here, along with Al Corlin of A.B. Corlin and Associates.
You know, Paul, you and I have done some very, very interesting interviews over the last day and a half or so, but I've got to tell you, I feel truly honored right now because one of my heroes, how can a 60-year-old guy have a hero, Congressman? But one of my heroes, Congressman Ron Paul, who Jay Taylor, a frequent guest on our show, was kind enough to introduce us to 5 or 6 years ago, is here right now. We're chatting with him. Congressman, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's real nice to be here.
Let's talk a little bit to begin with. Let's talk a little bit about your opinion about the future strength of the U.S. economy and how gold, other precious metals investments plays into that.
Well, I am pessimistic about the economy.
I think that's 4 people at this table.
I think we've been living on borrowed money and borrowed time, and I think there's still a lot of wealth, and a lot of people feel good about the economy, but I think they're deceiving themselves. I mean, the big discussion on the financial statement is it going to be a soft landing or a hard landing? And the optimists are saying, oh, no, it's already, the landing has occurred, and we're on our way back up.
Yeah.
No, I think there's so much malinvestment, misdirected investment, so much built-in monetary inflation that is going to translate into price inflation, a weak economy. I think it's somewhat like the 70s, but different. I think conditions are much worse than the 70s, so I expect the economy to weaken, but price inflation to come back, which means stagflation. And, of course, the extreme of stagflation is a inflationary depression. And whether or not we'll reach that stage is yet to be determined, but I think we're in for some very, very serious times, which means that under those conditions, paper assets are always the worst kind of investment, and hard assets are the best investments. And it's been a long time when we've seen a full cycle of good times for hard assets, but I believe the last 5 years has been we've seen the beginning of that, and I think that's going to continue.
You know, I don't think there's any question about that, Congressman. I'm curious about one thing. You know, when Jay called Paul and I, again, as I said, 5 or 6 years ago, and said, Congressman Ron Paul is somebody you really have to meet, because Jay and I, up to that conversation, Jay and I talked a lot about politics, and the conclusion that we came to was that principles right now seem to be lacking to an extent back in Washington, D.C., or in the various state capitals, what have you. Politics are a very interesting animal right now. You've got some principles, though. You know, you were, as I recall, before you got involved in politics, you were a pretty successful pediatrician. Developed hundreds of babies, if I'm not mistaken.
Obstetrician, and delivered 4,000 babies. So I was very, very busy and enjoyed it too. Matter of fact, getting into politics was sort of a lark. I didn't really expect to be elected.
Well, you know, the thing that I find funny is a good obstetrician typically has a mansion in the city, a summer home any place they want, a couple of Cadillacs, a very, very nice, cushy life, so to speak. You opted to go the other way. You opted to make a difference in our country, attempt to make a difference. Why was that?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One, I believed it was in my self-interest because I placed the value of liberty above more goods, and I thought it was worthwhile for my kids. So it isn't selfless giving. It's seen in a bit of self-interest. I also enjoy it because I enjoy discussing ideas, and to have meetings and dinners and associations with like-minded people. It's to me more fun, even more fun than playing golf. But
there
of course,
you go. Well, no, I'm not sure about that, but okay.
If you get to play golf with like-minded people, then you really have fun.
Yeah.
So, or fishing or something like that. I just never took that up very well. I do play a little bit of golf, but no, I think it should be fun, and it should be for a purpose. And to me, it's been rather easy. A lot of people ask, well, how can you do that? How can you stand up against what they're doing in Washington and you stick to it? Matter of fact, it would be very difficult for me to do it the other way. If you said, well, on this occasion, we want you reelected, so please bend a little bit and be practical here and don't vote this way because it's not that important. You know, it's just one vote. That would, you know, it's just that my makeup is such that I wouldn't be able to do that.
But when you come down to the real foundation of the United States, that's not what it's all about. I mean, our country got to be where it was, and I'd have to say where it is today, because of the principles that we had. I see those principles kind of being, as you say, bent a little bit right now for self-interest. What are your comments on that?
Well, I think what has happened is that we've lost respect for the rule of law. We have a good Constitution, and it's very important. We've abused it, but it's really the principle of the rule of law that we should protect. And since we, as a people, have been very fortunate, though imperfect, the Constitution has provided a lot for our families previously, because we have become very wealthy and we've enjoyed a tremendous amount of freedoms. But it's the rule of law, and fortunately following the rule of law, the Constitution has been beneficial. But now we lack respect for the rule of law, and we don't follow the Constitution, and that's how we've gotten ourselves into such trouble.
Truth. Yeah, that's the truth, Paul.
Congressman, I want to ask you something that I think goes to the heart of what everybody's dissatisfaction with politics is right now. We elect people and we send them to Washington or our state capitals or wherever based on what they say they want to do or what their principles are. They get there and they become too pragmatic. They don't compromise when we wish they would, and they compromise on things that we feel are principles that should not be compromised. You have made a great example for people by, in some cases, taking stands that are opposed by most people in your district, and yet those same people vote to re-elect you. Why don't more elected officials take the example from you and other people like you, that if they hold to their principles, even if it's one I don't particularly agree with, that makes them more electable? I mean, you just went through redistricting in Texas, and so you're in a new district that you've never had before, and still won 61% of the vote in a year when Republicans got hammered.
Well, I guess you'll have to ask those others, why they don't do it. I don't know. But they believe they can't be reelected. And, of course, my goal has been to try to set an example where I can show that you can stick to those principles and get reelected. And so far, so good. We've been able to do that. And it is true. It isn't always easy. For instance, prior to the district I have now, it was 90% agriculture. I had 21 counties, and it was essentially all farmers. But I never voted for farm subsidies.
And you still got reelected.
And got reelected.
How do you explain that?
By being upfront with them.
Yeah.
And the truth is that they haven't benefited that much by subsidies. I said, well, if the subsidies have helped you, and we've had them for 70 years, why aren't you all rich? And the family farmer's still struggling. I said, all the funds are going to the corporate farmers.
Exactly.
And then I play on their true beliefs. Property rights, inheritance taxes, federal regulators coming on their property, and they say, that's right, Second Amendment, Texas farmer. So they say, they all of a sudden found out that they agreed with me on a lot of issues, but it's the organizations, whether it's the AMA in medicine that never really was a supporter of mine,
right,
or whether it's the farm unions. They don't support the small farmers. They become politicized. They become part of the system. And that's what a lot of politicians don't realize. They see, the farmers organization doesn't support this bill, so I have to vote for it, or they'll be after me. And I think they sometimes are just lazy. They don't want to go home and explain it, and tell the people why they've done such a thing, certain things.
One of the interesting things that's happening in this conversation right now is a fellow who I have known, as I said, for a long time, who I've never pictured this gentleman as being a wallflower, as Jay Taylor. And Jay hasn't said a word yet. Jay, what do you have to say to your buddy here?
Well, I guess I would like to ask the congressman whether he thinks there's going to be any policy shift on the monetary front. Congressman Paul is on the House Finance Committee, I guess it is, with the new Fed chairman. I'd just like to get his remarks if he thinks it's going to make any difference, or if there will be, if Mr. Bernanke may be more inflationary than Mr. Greenspan, even, who was a great inflationist.
Yeah, there probably won't be any significant change. The important thing to remember about monetary policy, it's more secretive than the CIA. I can find out more information from the CIA, which is very secretive, than I could from the Open Market Committee. I can't attend that or find out, and they don't allow us to know what's going on.
Isn't that an interesting comment? I mean, that's an interesting comment on our system. Yeah,
because there's a lot more money. There's a lot of money wasted in the CIA, and it gets us into a lot of trouble. But the big money, all the money in the country is manipulated by the Federal Reserve. But on monetary policy, now the new chairman, Barney Frank, told me that he says, I'm looking forward to it because you and I can work together in checking up on the Federal Reserve, which more than a Republican would do. So I'm encouraged by that. But Barney Frank is a liberal, and he wants the Fed to have lower interest rates, as a liberal would, and not understanding the whole issue. But where I think we'll make inroads is on more transparency. I think that we might be able to at least publicly pressure the Fed and maybe the working group on financial markets, find out what they're doing, and maybe at least put pressure on them to tell us how central bank coordination is used. I think that's a big secret that nobody even talks about, but I think that's very big. This central bank coordination, and of course the financial markets, the working group on financial markets is big. And here we have Bernanke who talks about transparency. So the first thing he does is takes away transparency. He doesn't even allow us to know what the money supply is doing. Takes away M3.
I find that to be really, really interesting. I was going to ask you about that. I mean, and is that statistic going to come back and be as obvious as it was, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago?
I doubt it. I doubt it.
Yeah.
They didn't want it. And when I tried to stir up a little interest, I went to friends on both sides, Republican and Democrats, who've been on the banking committee for years and years, and they couldn't have been less interested.
Yeah.
There was no concern, and they didn't think it was important.
A funny thing's happened, though. M3 is now being calculated externally by the private sector.
Sure it is.
Which means that all that's happened is that the Fed has lost control of publishing that number.
That's good.
I think that's definitely good. A question that I have that we've discussed with Jay numerous times on the program is we talk about the fallacy of a monetary system that has no basis. A monetary system that basically is akin to a house of cards.
And the unconstitutionality of it.
Well, I mean, your friend, you were nice enough to introduce this to Judge Napolitano, and we had a conversation with him about that. And I'm amazed that our monetary system is working. And I guess the question I would have for you, and I use the term working loosely, okay? But let's assume that the monetary system is working right now. I don't believe it can go on ad infinitum, so to speak. I don't think you can have an economy that has a currency that isn't based on something, and our currency is based on nothing.
Well, it's based on an illusion and a false trust, and it can't continue because the trust will eventually be lost. But Mises taught in Human Action that all money originates in the marketplace, so it has to have real value. And the dollar did originate. It originated as a silver dollar and had real value, and there was gold and silver. And throughout the 20th century, that was undermined until it was finally totally destroyed in 1971.
Right.
So we've had this total fiat dollar since 1971. You say, well, why didn't it end? Why did it last for 35 more years? Well, it was because of the origination. There are still members, believe this or not, there are still members on the banking committee that believe that the dollar is backed by gold.
You've got to be kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. They still do, and they're very disinterested. But they'll come and say, "Isn't the dollar backed by gold?" Well, no, not quite.
You know that, Jay? I was totally unaware of that.
Well, I know that I found it fascinating that my son in his high school course somewhere along the line was taught that by his teacher. In fact, so
that the dollar is
backed by gold. So it's I think it's a common perception that probably allows confidence in the dollar to be retained.
That's right, and it's a false confidence, and that will be lost. So actually, it's a great benefit to us now. A lot of people who are demanding we change the exchange rates between the yuan and the dollar. They don't realize what's going to happen when the market really takes over. The market eventually will take over, and rule. But for now, we're going to benefit, and we are benefiting, and we're running our welfare and our warfare on borrowed money that we first created out of thin air.
Exactly. Well, here's an interesting question, okay? Basically, economies, at least as I understand it, economies grow because of productivity, okay? Productivity within the economy. Okay, our economy, I maintain, because of statistics that Jay brought up to Paul and I a number of years ago, our economy isn't growing because of increased productivity. Our economy is growing because of an increasing amount of debt on both the personal level and the governmental level, and basically people are out buying suits and clothes and cars with money they get from, at the risk of being simplistic, refinancing their homes. that can't go on forever. What's going to happen in the next 5 years?
Well, when the government gets involved and they run up this debt, and then it's put out in the economy, the debt eventually gets so high that it's not repayable, and our debt is not repayable.
Of course not.
There's going to be a default. But they won't quit writing checks. They're going to continue to create the credit, and they still remember very well, and you remember the conversation between Bernanke and Friedman, that it was the Fed's fault because they didn't print enough money in the Depression, rather than understanding that it was the Fed printing too much in the 20s. But what happens is they default by the real debt going down in terms of the value of the dollar. So to me, the most important event, and maybe last week was an indicator of the importance of this event, giving us a big sign, that is the dollar is under attack, and it's been under attack, not for a year or two or three, but since World War II. I mean, ever since Bretton Woods, the dollar's doing this, and I just suspect that one day that's going to be a big deal. For most people in a crowd like this, it's already a big deal, and they're watching it carefully.
You bet.
But someday it could be a big enough deal that even the members of the Banking Committee in the U.S. Congress will take notice.
Well, you mentioned Bretton Woods, and you mentioned Bretton Woods and some other things, and that takes me back to my undergraduate days and graduate days. And based on what I learned back, I hate to say this, back in the mid '60s, and then in graduate school in the early to mid '70s, is because of economic fundamentals, it's going to be absolutely terrifying what happens in this country when people put on the glasses and realize the emperor is not wearing any clothes. Mm-hmm. And I guess the question I have, and I know we have to wrap this up because you're a busy man right now, but the question I have is, do you have any thoughts on when that may happen in terms of a time frame?
Yeah, but they're not worth all that much.
Well, it's worth it. Listen, it's worth it to Paul and I. What do you think?
The most important thing is nobody knows.
Yeah.
But we still make estimates, I guess. And we're a lot closer than we were than 35 years ago, obviously. I would be pretty amazed that if we don't have a major event in the next 5 years. But,
I would agree, yeah.
But the way I look at it is that the foundation is gone. I mean,
what foundation?
The foundation to the economic system. The
exactly.
foundation.
It doesn't exist.
Or the dollar. There's no backing to the dollar. There's no convertibility to the dollar. So this is a house of cards. It's in an event. I mean, while we sit here this very week, there might be something happens in the Middle East. Yeah. El Salvador may determine. If he breaks away from the so-called government of Maliki in Iraq, that might set things off, and in the war that we're losing in Iraq or Afghanistan as well, something could happen there internationally that would frighten people that that there's something awfully wrong, and then there's a panic out of the dollar. Mm-hmm. And right now it's in the interest of everybody who's holding dollars, the Chinese and the Japanese, to keep this together.
Well, they have to, of course. They have to, yeah.
But then there might be remember when they said that the banks and the investors would always keep the Nikkei at 40,000, that they would always buy each other's stock? I mean, it's
didn't happen.
It was 17 years, and it's still 15, 16,000.
Right.
So this whole idea that they can keep it together is an illusion, and that's the market speaking. The market is more powerful. So when we get discouraged about the power of the Federal Reserve and the power of the Congress, let's hope and pray that we have enough freedom. And fortunately, now we have enough freedom where we can talk about this. We can actually, not too many years ago, we couldn't even buy gold coins. Now we can buy gold coins, and we can be on our own gold standard.
The really positive thing of events like this, and politicians such, I guess I should not use the word politician, but leaders such as yourself, and I mean that very seriously, is that there is no other country in the world where we can have this conversation openly. There is no other country in the world where Paul and I can have a radio show where we discuss issues like this. There's no other country in the world when someone as prominent, for example, as Judge Andrew Napolitano can put out a book lambasting what's going on in the government. I think that very fact is what's going to allow us to survive what I believe is going to be an incredibly large crisis, as you say, in the very near future.
And there's one another thing. Your radio show and others like this are very important, but it's the internet. Just think about the internet. I have the record for voting for the least amount of regulation of anybody, probably any place in Congress, but especially on the internet. And it's a politically risky vote to take because my opponent painted me as pro-pornography and pro-gambling because I didn't want to regulate the internet. Of course, I fell back to the old-fashioned belief that maybe parents have something to say about raising kids.
How many kids do you have?
5.
And how many wives? 4 or 5 wives?
I think, just see, 1.
One wife, right. Big into pornography, huh? Yeah.
So that was used against me, but the important issue, and I think most people in a conference like this would understand how valuable the internet is because that's where the information is circulating.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it'd be hard for them to get rid of the internet or gather up our guns or take our gold coins.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to happen. And they were much more passive in the 30s, but I believe Americans today will not give up their guns and they will not give up their gold coins and they're not going to give up their internet, even though we allow our Congress to start into the regulating of the internet for making sure that you're a better person, make sure you don't gamble and this sort of thing.
I've got to tell you, I can't thank you enough for being here. I think that's a great place to end this. I think it's very important for listeners, folks at this show, to be aware that we do live in the greatest country in the world, and what you're saying is the regulation may exist, but the freedoms will never be lost, and that's what's going to get us through. Congressman Ron Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We'll be back with more from San Francisco on the Corlin Economics Report from the 2006 Hard Assets Investment Conference. Thanks for joining us.